Hello, Milk Making Minutes listeners. Today, I want to talk a little bit about tandem feeding. This has been on my mind after my interview released with Lindsay, who shared her story of um, feeding two sets of twins from her very own body. And she talked about why she often does not recommend tandem feeding twins right at the beginning until a person has really gotten settled in to feeding those twins separately. But that's a little bit of a different story than tandem feeding an older sibling who's already been feeding from the body and then a newborn. And I've been seeing some questions circulating online, and I've had clients asking me questions about tandem feeding. So I thought it was about time that we got into tandem feeding a little bit. So let's get into it.
When I began breastfeeding, I was blindsided by how difficult it was. I may have thought I was prepared, but having known only a handful of people who had ever breastfed and only seeing it up close from a couple of them, I had a huge learning curve. Since then, I've become a doula, a lactation consultant, and a childbirth educator. I'm your host, Lo Nigrosh, and I welcome you to the Milk Making Minutes, where we explore breastfeeding experiences through the lens of systemic barriers, so that you know your breastfeeding struggles are not your fault, and your triumphs really are the miracles you feel they are.
The first thing you need to know is that the decision is solely yours. If you want to tandem feed, great. If you don't want to tandem feed, great. It is your decision to make. So I can talk to you a bit about what goes into the decision and about the practicalities of tandem feeding. But in the end, it is you who gets to decide whether or not this will work for your family. And I can tell you just from my own personal experience, I was still feeding my son at 3.5 years old when I was pregnant with my second. The pain that I had experienced for the entire time that I was feeding him had finally resolved and things were going well. And then once I got pregnant with my second child, the pain returned. And I thought, nope, not doing this. I am not going to have all this pain again while I feed through pregnancy, because sometimes that can happen. And even though I had always dreamed of tandem feeding, I went ahead and decided to wean my son. And so your plans can change as well. You can think that one thing is for you and then decide, you know what, this isn't for me. Or you can think to yourself, I would never tandem feed. And then that ends up being what you do. Just like some people think they would never feed a baby past 1, and then they end up feeding a baby from their body that is 3 or 4. So we're allowed to change our minds as well. You will hear in episode 29 with my guest, Emily. She really talks about being fear-mongered by her providers about tandem feeding, about how unsafe it was. And that is just not the case. For most people, tandem feeding is very safe. And so, of course, this is something to discuss individually with your providers, but it is also important to be aware that your providers might not be educated about the topic. So, if you listen to episode 12 with my guest, Carrie, she brought up a really great resource, which is a text called Adventures in Tandem Nursing, Breastfeeding During Pregnancy and Beyond by Hilary Flower. And it is a great book that goes into great detail about tandem nursing. And in the book, several experts on miscarriage and tandem nursing are quoted. And they basically debunk that idea that for most people, it is very safe, and that the vast majority of people tandem feeding are able to do that. Tandem feeding can be correlated to uterine contractions in the same way that sex during pregnancy can be correlated to contractions of the uterine, but neither are considered dangerous. I found this on kellymom.com. So there's a whole page that I will link in the resources that has a bunch of resources linked when it comes to tandem feeding. But there's one page that has several experts quoted, and one is from chapter 12, Health Concerns. And Leslie Reagan is a PhD and an MD. She heads the miscarriage clinic at St. Mary's Hospital in London, the largest referral unit in Europe, and she's the author of Miscarriage: What Every Woman Should Know. She was surprised to hear that anyone considers issues related to miscarriage to be a reason for weaning. And she added, once a pregnancy is clinically detectable, breastfeeding should pose no added risk of pregnancy loss. There isn't any data suggesting a link between breastfeeding and miscarriage, and I see no plausible reason for there to be a link. So that's one quote from the book, Tandem Nursing, Breastfeeding During Pregnancy and Beyond, that was listed on Kelly Mom. So that is a great resource for you if you are thinking about tandem feeding. Some of the reasons that I have heard that people have decided to wean, um, it is painful. It is sometimes painful to be nursing during pregnancy. That's different for every person, but for me, it was, and I have heard that from a lot of other people. Sometimes, as the milk transitions to colostrum, the older nurslings self weans because it's just not as much milk as they prefer, and the milk does start to taste different. And so then the older nursling isn't as satisfied with that nursing relationship. And so sometimes they just lose interest. That often happens. Sometimes the nursing parent during that pregnancy, when they're so tired out, they just feel touched out. And so that's a good enough reason to wean if you're feeling touched out and like you need to set boundaries, especially as you prepare to be a parent of more than one child. Sometimes the nursing parent worries about the younger nursling getting enough, especially if that was an issue the first time around. And so they just want to be on the safe side. There's really not a lot of data to indicate that is a problem. But if the nursing parent needs to ease their mind that the newborn baby is going to get enough milk, then that is often a reason that the parent will wean. There are definitely ways that you can continue to tandem feed and still be able to set boundaries. So, Nancy Moorbacher, in her book that I'm constantly mentioning, which is called Breastfeeding Answers: A Guide for Helping Families, she sets up her thinking on this in three different categories: thinking about the newborn's needs, thinking about the older siblings' needs, and thinking about the parents' needs. And I think that's a really great way to look at it, because you do have three human beings' needs that you're considering as you are making these decisions. And it's important to be considering all three. So, when it comes to thinking about nursing during pregnancy and then once the baby is born, especially if the older sibling is two or older too, they can definitely learn to wait, and you can start setting boundaries with them if that is the parent's preference. And so you can begin to tell them that they can nurse at certain times, be setting boundaries about when during the day they can nurse. If they're only going to nurse at home and not outside the home, that's fine as well. Um, and Nancy Moorbacher brings up a really good point, that it really is best to blame waiting on the parent or on external circumstances and not on the pregnancy or the baby, because this can start to build up resentment towards the baby. And there's already going to be a lot of resentment with so much of the parent's time taken up with the baby, that you don't want to blame the older siblings' inability to nurse on the baby. So, the example that she gives, which I think is a really good one, is I'm tired and need to rest. So, just saying, I as a person am tired, and not saying, being pregnant makes me tired, so I need to rest and you can't nurse right now, because then the older sibling associates tiredness with this new baby, and now my parent isn't available to me in the way that I want them to be, and it's the baby's fault. And so really thinking about your wording there when you are setting boundaries around nursing. So same thing, once the baby is born, you can say things like, I need to focus on nursing just one child, it's easier for me to do that. Once I'm done with one child, then I'll be happy to nurse you. So instead of blaming it on the baby needs the milk first, try to put it on you, what your needs are in that moment, if that makes sense. Once your colostrum does start to come in, colostrum will have a laxative effect on older children, and you will start to see that older child have looser stools. And this will last for as long as you have colostrum and sort of that transitional milk. And that's totally to be expected and nothing to worry about. This will clear up once the milk fully transitions. So that's just something practically to think about. There is no need to limit the older child if they are nursing together. So if you decide that it's best for you to nurse both children simultaneously, they can just both nurse as much as they want during any given session. But if you are deciding that you would like to nurse them separately, newborn first and then older sibling, you would want to make sure that newborn is getting between 8 and 12 feeds in the day, and then relegating the older child to whatever is left over after that. There's no need to designate the children to any particular side, even during illness, because they've already been exposed to those germs. The one case in which that might be different is if you're dealing with some sort of fungus or thrush. And then if only one of the children happens to have it, then you might relegate them to one side. But most likely everybody has it, and you're probably going to have to treat everybody. Yeah. And so then as you continue with the tandem nursing, you just continue thinking about each of your needs, newborn's needs, older siblings' needs, and your needs. And particularly thinking about your needs, sometimes the parent will start to feel a little touched out, and you'll begin to set more boundaries for that older sibling. And this is not a super evidence based resource, but I found Janet Lansbury's podcasts and blog posts very helpful for setting boundaries with an older child around a baby to be so incredibly helpful. So if you are looking for resources around that, I highly recommend you check out her podcast. And episodes that I have had on the Milk Making Minutes featuring tandem nursing, I already mentioned two. I'll have them linked in the show notes, but just older sibling to younger sibling tandem nursers. I had episode 29 with Emily, episode 25 with Erin, episode 12 with Carrie. And then I've had two parents who talked about, actually, I've had three twin parent episodes where they did some amount of tandem nursing, meaning you're always tandem nursing with twins, but some amount of simultaneous twin nursing. Episode 69 with Lindsay, episode 35 with Sarah, and then episode 4 with Cassandra. That was a really interesting story because she had two stories of really wanting to breastfeed and not being able to, and then finally having twins and fully breastfeeding her twins. I hope that you check those out and listen to those. I'll have them all linked in the show notes. So, if you are considering tandem feeding and would like some help going over your options and what that could look like for you, I would love to be the person that helps you go over those options and figure out what is best for your family. You can find my info at www.quabbinbirthservices.com, linked in the show notes. As always, I can often bill your insurance or create a super bill for you to get reimbursed from your insurance company because your insurance is required to pay for lactation services under the Affordable Care Act. So I would love to be the person that helps you walk through this prenatally or once your baby is already born. And if you are looking to discuss tandem feeding or any other interesting topic related to feeding our babies from our own bodies, please join my Milk Making Minutes community group. I have a contest going on right now where you can win a free virtual lactation consultation with me. The details are in my Milk Making Minutes community group. Essentially, you need to join the group, follow me on social media, and share the Milk Making Minutes with a friend. and rate and review the podcast. If you do all that, you can win a virtual consult for yourself or a friend or family member. All right, see you in the group. Bye.